Episode 2, Stormborn.
Yes. Stormborn.
Yeah, Stormborn. A reference.
I wanted to call it the Mad King's Daughter, but I was overruled.
Okay.
That's
Thank
a good
you.
one, though.
That's a good way to start because my first question was, Daenerys is with her, her war council, as I would call them. Her small council would be befitting a queen.
Yes.
Talking about how she's gonna invade Westeros and take it over and sit on the Iron Throne, and she talks. We see her talk with Varys, and they have a very real conversation. But in Daenerys is talking about Jon, needing allies. What I was impressed by was the little hints that we saw of potentially her becoming like her father. In those conversations, where she threatening to burn somebody alive in any universe is not great. Particularly,
she has dragons. It's an effective form of execution.
That's what I hope that she does to Cersei, but that's neither here nor there. But knowing what her father was doing to people, it's sort of like that line sticks in your ear, and also seeing like Jon, they're gonna invite him down. And she wants him to immediately bend the knee.
Yeah, I mean, she sees this as her birthright, plain and simple. They took this from her; it's hers. And so much of the episode and and really the whole season, and not just for Dany, but for a lot of our characters. And this, I think, is fitting on the fact that it's essentially these are the final episodes. Characters dealing with the legacy of their families. And the generations that preceded them, and dealing not only with how they feel about it and what they might share with some of those ancestors, but how other people perceive, that legacy. Just kind of why I wanted to originally call it the Mad King. I like Storm. I think it's a great title, actually. But the reason I wanted to originally call it the Mad King's Daughter, and actually it would have made more sense in the original edit. There were more characters referring to her as that, and pretty much every scene. And that I think some of that was lost in the final edit, but in the original script and in the original edit, which was longer, pretty much every character that wasn't in the Dany circle was referring to the Mad King's Daughter is here. So this idea of she's got a reputation before she ever sets foot, and because she's got her father's reputation. So that first scene is definitely about her reconciling with that, wrestling with how much of that legacy is good for her brand, if you will, and what isn't. And certainly that is a big part of why this strategy, is a non-firebombing strategy, where it's like, you could come in here and torch the whole place, and everyone would be horrified. And what have you achieved? If you want to rule, you need to take a different approach, and so that's what informs that. But under that, and I think you picked up on something in that first scene, is that she's got a real kind of need and desire to go in guns blazing. And talking about how one would approach scenes from an emotional point of view, the scene has to set up exposition. It has to set up, because I had what normally falls in the season premiere with this particular subplot, because they were only in the last few minutes of the season premiere in a wordless sequence. So a lot of the where are we now kind of stuff fell to me in this episode. So the way to make that not dry is to attach some kind of an emotional arc, an emotional through line. And also, we had to deal with the fact that she hadn't discussed any of Varys's, attempts to maybe kill her in earlier seasons with him. So her kind of frustration and desire to move faster, she channels that into this interrogation of Varys. So again, it's something, and when you have an actor like Emilia who's so good at this, it's all about that what's bubbling under the surface that isn't in the dialogue but informs the scene. So that was that was how I approached writing the scene. It was a really hard scene to write, and it was a lot longer at one point. It had a lot more information dumped on it, and we shot a lot of other stuff where basically Varys is just updating them on everything, and it's fun if you're reading a Wikipedia article, but not if you're watching television. I get a lot. I mean, I'm sure a lot of purists of the mythology, and I'm one of them, as much as they might disagree, but want to hear more of that stuff. but in dialogue, it really doesn't play. And we're in Act 3 now of our story, where there needs to be kind of an Act 3 pace if we're talking about screenplay rules.
Right.
That's one. The last third needs to have some momentum, and so this last third of the show will. A lot of the fat's been trimmed.
Cool. So on the note of Dany's conquest, I think one of the most interesting characters in this is the fact that Tyrion is basically here and he's helping plan this conquest basically against his own family.
Yeah.
And so I was curious, like, when writing that, like, what is that like kind of inside of his head? Like, what do you think is going on internally for him there?
Well, this will be explored a lot in future episodes, so I don't want to say too much. But yeah, I mean, look, even though this is a family that never treated him so well, it was still his family, and he loves his brother, and in spite of everything, there's still a connection to his sister that, that's something that the show fleshed out a bit differently than in the books. I think in the books, it's fair to say that they both really just hate each other, and they hate each other on the show too, but there were moments of, particularly in season 2, before it all really went to hell, of kind of a little bit of grace between them. That, of course, was immediately ripped to shreds because it's Game of Thrones. Yeah. But he, I mean, being a Lannister is how he defined his life, even at the worst of times and the lowest of times. And when he was given opportunities to shine and to serve his family, he did so. I mean, he was hand to the king to Joffrey and tried put everything to defending the city. And tried his best, really up until the point that his father tried to have him executed for a murder he didn't commit. There's real conflict there, even though he believes in what he's doing and believes in the cause, and that I think we'll definitely see.
So a couple of times during the episode, we and I'm looking to the north now, shifting to Sansa. She undermines Jon a couple of different times in the episode, and I was just kind of wondering.
I think it's interesting how, though. I mean, I don't want to pick on you, but when it's Sansa, she's undermining him.
She is.
No, but I mean, so I mean, he's only been king like a week, and. Everyone's like, why is she undermining him in public? Well, let's think about it for a second. He has just walked in there and said that Aegon Targaryen's daughter has arrived with what are essentially nukes, invited him to come down, and he's going to go. It's a crazy, risky plan. Right. And his reasoning is sound, but her reasoning for being like, what the hell's wrong with you is sound. And why shouldn't she raise it there? He didn't bother to consult her. In private before the meeting.
Right.
So I feel like I get defensive of her. But, she's all, and also, and this is something that's important to remember, is she's a kid. I mean, these are all kids kind of thrust into these leadership positions. And it's messy. And their relationship as brother and sister is messy and complicated. So, I suppose she could use some more tact. But A, it's not as fun to write or perform, and B, again, she loves him. I mean, she loves him. She thinks he's risking his life. The last Targaryen that summoned a Stark, as she points out quite correctly, roasted said Stark alive in his own armor. So, anyway, that's how I feel about that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I hated Sansa in the beginning of the show. And then I am totally on Team Sansa now, although she's trying it.
See, it's interesting because it's hard for me to, and I understand this is how people watch the show, which is what's so fun about it. I'm not on team anybody. I think that's the fun of as I'm on everyone's team. Like I love Cersei. I want Cersei to win. I love Dany. I want Dany to win. I love Jon. I want Jon to win. Part of me loves the Night King. Wants the Night King to win. I think. And not to interrupt you, but I think that's something as a writer, like you shouldn't be afraid to have your characters make mistakes and act selfishly and put them into dark places, but you've also got to, as a writer, understand why they're doing it and empathize with them, with every single one of them, and that includes the worst of them. Yeah. And that's not always a comfortable thing to do. But I think it makes for. I think if you as a writer are judging your character, it's an easy trap to fall into. Anyway, but sorry, but I interrupted you.
No. So speaking of characters, I'll transition this to somewhere else.
No, you don't have to. I'm sorry.
No, because it was brilliant. we are in the North and in Dragonstone to converge the two plots, and we find out that the prince that was promised, the word in High Valyrian actually is gender neutral, so it can mean the prince or the princess. And we have, somebody who was reborn in Jon, and Dany very much was, went into the fire in season 1 and came out with 3 dragons and an army and has been on the march ever since. So I'm really fascinated by that part and like what role the two of them might have to play going forward.
It is a fascinating thing to ponder.
Yes.
Yeah, I imagine there's
Can't really say much more than
that. Yeah.
I'm trying.
Yeah.
Because I want to know.
Yeah, I think that's like definitely what I'm looking forward to most, though. I know you can't say much, but just to write that down, like I'm very.
It's
eager
been
to see.
it is fun. It's been fun this season to have worlds collide. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
It felt like a very different like this season, and I think it feels like it's a very different show. I mean, it's just a different show now that Dany's there, and and as I said, because we're sort of kind of barreling to a conclusion. So it's got a different tone, a slightly different pace. Some of our rules were breaking or adjusting, and that was a little unmooring when writing it, and even when shooting it, and even for the actors, they were like, "Whoa, okay, wow, well, we're time passes in between scenes much quicker.
Mm-hmm.
Someone writes a Raven scroll, and the next scene someone's reading it.
Yeah.
That's just the nature of kind of the decision to sort of accelerate it a little bit.
So one question I have just on the note of like heroes with this Azor Ahai stuff, everything is. Do you feel there's like one or two central heroes of Game of Thrones, or do you think it's very like kind of decentralized in the sense that there's all these different arcs?
No, that's a good question. No, I mean, sure. I mean, you can look at it kind of step away and go, well, Jon and Sansa, Jon and Tyrion and Dany are the but no, I mean, I feel like they're all the heroes of their own story.
Right.
Kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. I mean, when you're approaching the Cersei arc, you're writing her as the heroine of her story. I mean, you're writing her as when you're going from, let's start with just say Joffrey's death. In terms of a arc, multi-season arc, you start with Joffrey's death, how that manifests itself in her undermining of House Tyrell, how that barrels into her arming the Faith, how the Faith turns the tables on her, and she is then marginalized and has to take back what she thinks at this point is hers. I mean, that is a hero's journey in and of itself. It's a very twisted hero's journey, and some terrible shit goes down, and she's not a traditional hero. But I think when you're writing it, when you're in that mode, yeah, she's the protagonist. So yeah, I think my answer to the question is no. I wouldn't say there's just one hero of Game of Thrones. I think for me anyway, it's all of them. I mean, that's kind of that's George. I mean, that's the beauty of George's structure of the books and why he very purposefully structured them in point of view chapters where you are in specific characters' heads. To sort of go against that kind of classic, here's your hero, here's your heroine, here's your villain kind of thing. And he's certainly not the first person to do it, but I think he by approaching it from a phrase he uses a lot, which is politics is personal, this really kind of exploring the personal in all of this stuff, even through all the court machinations and the strategies and the big, prophecy, all that stuff. Again, that is window dressing. It's ultimately a story of families and people connecting, and families that are then spread out that then create new quasi-families, and what happens when those people who have created these new quasi-families, when these new quasi-families meet, and you might discover that you're not the person you were back then, or maybe you are the person you were back then. And that's what's been fun about this season, is sort of bumping up against that without getting into recap mode. That's the other big danger of this season, was a lot of characters meeting who haven't seen each other for the last 5 seasons. I had a scene in the episode that didn't ever make it. We never even shot it. It didn't make it past the first or second draft, where Tyrion and Theon had a scene. Because I thought, well, we should give them a scene together. 2 of our best actors, they're here. They're on Dragonstone. They've got a lot to talk about. But it ended up just being a recap of everything between, and they were basically talking about Sansa the whole time, which is great. But we all watched that. We all saw it. We know what happened. And and so while it was sort of dramatically inert, as satisfying as it would be to see Theon talk about Sansa, whom he had this really intense, well, they both had really intense kind of time with her. Ultimately, it just felt like, well, and then there was that time where, we escaped from the castle. Oh, well, so we had to really avoid that and still have to a lot because there's a fan servicey thing that makes you, and there's a lot of that still on the show because for dramatic purposes and for story purposes, they have to talk about certain things, but you got to find a way to sort of pithily do it, and assume that all those recap conversations happened off screen.
You mentioned politics, so we see Jaime sort of
playing the politician,
the politician to Cersei, but Cersei is also. I feel like it's interesting. I feel like they're complementing each other, even though there's a sort of rift between the two.
Yeah.
Cersei is smartly, even though we might not like it, smartly mentioning, the Mad King's daughter, and she's got these dragons, and she's going to bring the Dothraki over here.
Yeah, she's preying on their xenophobia.
On the phobia, and he can come in and sort of get, rally the troops. And we see, next week potentially people are coming to Casterly Rock, so it's probably good to get on the same page with all these things.
Well, without commenting on what happens next week, I mean that is a fun thing to explore. Now that Cersei is the Iron Throne seated queen, she's up here and she's not, she's making the big pronouncements and having her. But the problem is she doesn't have a lot of people left around her anymore. She killed most of them, so she's got her hand and kind of mad scientist guy, and then she's got her Qyburn, who's wonderful. Anton Lesser. That's another thing. Oh God, I mean the joy of this show, and I'm such an Anglophile anyway. So working with these actors, actors like Anton. I mean, Anton is one of the foremost Shakespearean actors in the world. And there's a great video of, if you can find it, of the BBC of him. It might not be the BBC, but he's playing Festi in a film production of Twelfth Night. He's fantastic. But anyway, just having him and all these wonderful actors has been such a joy. But Cersei's utilizing Jaime as he's the commander of the army, and he knows he is good at he's gotten better at the politicking of it all. But as you say, he's troubled by his sister even more than he ever has been before, arguably. And but he still loves her and wants to try to make this crazy thing work. But it's a fun dynamic to explore this season. And Nikolai's another actor who is just so much fun to write.
Yeah, on that note of Cersei and Qyburn and all of these weapons they managed to come up with, I thought this new massive bow,
the Scorpion.
Big game changer, because I think going into the season it was easy to be like, oh yeah, no, Dany's got 3 dragons, everyone else just has swords and bows and arrows. It's it's clear who's gonna win, but now it's okay, there's a different balance of that power now.
And I saw a lot of people go, oh really, could a dragon be hurt by that? Well, I would beg you to look at George R. Martin's Dance of the Dragons supplementary material in there is precedent for dragons being brought down by by big spears, so it could be done. I mean it's the it was a tricky thing. I mean Cersei on paper is vastly outnumbered and outgunned. So how do you make this war a real fight? And the Scorpion is one element that has been brought into it, and Euron Greyjoy this season is another element, another weapon that she has deployed effectively.
Is Euron the new supervillain of the show?
Well, I don't know. He's just trying to get married and make his way in the world. He's been gone a long time. He's got interesting methods and an outlook on life, but no, he's definitely meant to be a sort of wild card that was thrown in this last act to sort of mix things up and add a different kind of dynamic and a real kind of rival for Jaime in the whole dynamic. And Pilu brings a wonderful kind of swagger and sort of swashbuckle nature to it, but he's also batshit crazy. But yeah, he was meant to be sort of a wild card, the kind of thing you throw into a story to just sort of knock some of it off the rails, and which is what he has done, will do.
Will?
Oh man.
Now he's just gonna go. Now he's
He already snatched Yara and Alaria
yes.
in another stand.
And Tyene, yeah.
And destroyed part of the fleet.
Yep.
And Theon is just floating on a piece of wood.
Theon's not having a good time.
Oh, man.
No, he's not.
Alfie's like, really? I have to sit in the tank? That, by the way, that scene was shot in a parking lot. Just so you know.
Wow. Okay.
That's the parking lot. We have one ship set, and it sits in a parking lot in Northern Ireland with a big, huge green screen surrounding it. And that sequence was shot over, I want to say 6-7 nights, maybe.
Jeez.
Gemma sadly injured herself shooting it, so we then had to come back and do her sides of the fight months later. But it was a crazy sequence to do.
Yeah. So we're just in, like, the gift that he is bringing Cersei are these people who have wronged her, in particular with Alaria and Tyene.
Most likely
Yes,
that's the
most
gift. I really can't confirm. It might be. He might have another gift. Who knows?
Oh my goodness. How many more gifts?
I get in trouble. There's a sniper trained on me right now. I can't say that.
Well, one of the things about that scene that a lot of people on Twitter were commenting that you have a really good understanding of Theon. They've noticed that in the episodes that you've been able to write, that you have a really great handle on Theon, and we see him.
Sometimes I don't get the nicest compliments on Twitter, so that's good.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, Theon. No, I've loved writing for Theon. Alfie. I talked before. Alfie is one of the kind of secret weapons of the show. I mean, not secret. He's there, but he hasn't had he hasn't had much fun.
No.
And he's always gone there. Like, I think there's some actors young actors starting their career, who would not. I think vanity would have prevented them from really going where Alfie had to go from season 3 on. And he is always, it can't have been fun for him season 3 strapped to a cross the whole time. I mean, he's really he really commits 100% to it, and it takes it very seriously, and approaches Theon with love. I mean, as an actor, even though Theon, it's very easy to judge him. He's made huge, horrible, terrible mistakes, but he approaches him with real empathy, and that shows on screen to the point where, at least some viewers, I think, some just fucking hate him, but I think plenty of people are, in spite of all of it, rooting for him. So yeah, he's phenomenal, and I got to write a few of his key episodes. I guess now that I think about it, I wrote the episode in season 2 where he decides to betray Robb, another dialogue-free scene. And that was a scene that I came up with in the writing of the script. It wasn't in the outline. Where I thought, we need to show the moment where he turns. And so the idea that he was writing a note to warn Robb and burns it, that was something that I dreamed up. And at the time, we were nervous because it was early on, and we knew Alfie was great, but we were like, can we do that scene with no dialogue? Will the audience get it? Will we be able to see him make that shift? And of course, it's all there. It's behind the eyes. He's got it. And so I got to do that scene and a few other key episodes of his down the line. So yeah, it was getting this scene to, again, I don't create the stuff in my episode. The writer's room, it's either David and Dan tell us here's something we're doing, or it's something we come up with together. And so I'm given, my section of the story to then script. But it was cool to be able to get to script that moment where Reek kind of rears his ugly head again, and that kind of PTSD-esque moment there.
Yeah, I feel like I could hardly blame him. Like, I was like,
and there it is. I mean, because he's gonna die if he does go. But I think many people and many Ironborn and Yara in that moment are like, well, okay, fine, die defending me.
Yeah.
But then again, the demon is there, the trauma is there from his years of abuse, and so.
Kind of jumping over a bit back to the north, Arya and Nymeria. That was big.
Yeah. And I wrote a Jon Ghost scene, by the way. We shot it. It was just cut. I keep trying.
Ghost?
The dire wolves are expensive. Ghost is there. He's just hanging out somewhere in this
yeah.
But yes, again, I was really excited to get to do that Nymeria bit.
Right.
Again, a bigger part of the books. In the books, Nymeria and her wolf pack are kind of seen throughout killing Lannisters in the Riverlands. So we couldn't really realize that as it is in the books, even just due to the expense of it alone. I mean, even just shooting that scene that you saw was very complicated. It was the last thing we shot. We shot it, I believe, this past February in Calgary, in Canada, because that's where the wolves are. We go to shoot the wolves on a kind of blue screen by themselves in Canada every year, and then insert their embiggenedness into scenes. So because of that, putting the direwolves in the scenes is very difficult because it's very time consuming. It takes a bunch of different visual effects setups. You've got, Kid or whoever petting a big green blob, stuffed kind of blob, and then you have to insert the wolf that you've hopefully gotten a performance out of in Canada, later. So it's difficult to put them in as many scenes as I think we would have wanted to when we all started this. But anyway, the Nymeria scene was, Maisie did go to Calgary and shoot, but, as you can tell if you're really watching, you don't really want to get wolves too close to you in shooting. So, yeah, that was a scene all about, the gulf between her and her past life, and she's going home, but is she? I mean, is it going to be home? Is she Arya anymore? Her wrestling with her own identity has been a big part of her storyline, and that was the pair of scenes in this episode was really meant to address that bit with Nymeria. And then there's a bit that I love. Again, this all comes back to no dialogue. Maisie has a moment in that scene with Hot Pie where Hot Pie, because Hot Pie hasn't changed. Hot Pie is Hot Pie. It's the Hot Pie we saw from, maybe he's a little nicer than the Hot Pie from season 1 because he's got a nice job and, he's doing what he loves. But he's still basically Hot Pie, but Arya is not the Arya of or is she? But when he says, what happened to you, Harry? And there's a very long, uncomfortable close-up of her looking at him, contemplating how could she begin to answer that question. And almost for a second trying to say something and then pulling back. And it actually brings me to tears watching it because it's a culmination of everything that this kid's been through. And Maisie as an actor, it's such a testament to her growth as an actor. Watching these young people grow as actors has been so wonderful and inspiring. So I love that little moment. But that's what those scenes are about, and what much of the season is about. How experience informs the choices you make now, and what you're, who are you really inside,
Yeah, I felt like that could have been a part of why Nymeria kind of turned around and walked back, was that it's like, like the direwolves is kind of like a representation of that Stark blood. Yeah. It's like,
that's season 1 Starks.
Yeah,
and that isn't the dynamic anime. And she's not a pet,
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, and she has no understanding of why Arya threw rocks at her and told her to bug off. So she has her life now, and she's a lone wolf, and Arya is too. And that little line, it's funny. I think I was too clever by half with her little line, because at the end of the scene she says, "That's not you." Yeah. And a lot of people didn't get what I meant by that. That's actually a callback to another scene that I wrote in the very first episode I wrote of season 1, where Ned is talking to her Arya on the stairs, and she says, "Well, can I be the Lord of a Holdfast or a knight?" And he says, "Well, you'll marry a Lord of a Holdfast, and you'll have his babies." And she says, "No, that's not me." So that was meant to, she recognizes, "Oh, that's not you." But a lot of people thought that apparently that she was saying, "Oh, you're not Nymeria after all. You must be another direwolf." It's not what she was saying. So I guess I was a little too clever by half there. But that's the idea, is that she sees herself in her, and she has to let her go.
Speaking of great, moments that use minimal to no dialogue, we have to talk about Grey Worm and Missandei.
Oh, yeah.
Because when I was watching this episode, I literally stopped breathing at a point because I thought you were going to actually show us.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The pillar and stones are both gone. That's the best way for me to put that with
the
audience that is currently here.
Yes.
But it was such a tender moment with him telling Missandei that he was the bravest one, but that she was his weakness, and they have this moment. Of
Yeah, it's a bit of a callback to another scene they had earlier in the series when he was wounded and saying he was afraid before he died. I love Jacob and Natalie. They're both terrific. They're terrific actors, that's a scene of two people that finally it's been a slow build of this relationship, purposefully, because the two of them come from a horribly traumatic past, both of them, and they're sort of finding each other and exploring sexuality with each other in this scene, and I sort of based it. It was inspired a little bit by a scene from a movie called Coming Home. I don't know if any of you have ever seen Coming Home, Hal Ashby movie, and it's about a wounded Vietnam vet who is I think he's paraplegic. John Voight plays it, but there's a very famous, at the time, very famous sex scene between him and Jane Fonda where he, he can't perform, but he is there for her, if you will, and explores sexuality that way, which at the time, it was a really revolutionary scene, kind of, where at the time was showing female pleasure, so that was sort of. I was writing the scene in a coffee shop, and it's kind of hard to script sex scenes, believe it or not. I was like, I should look at the Coming Home scene and so I had it on, and I realized, I hope no one's watching me watch John Voight go down on Jane Fonda here in this coffee shop. But I was in a corner. I think anybody saw. I think it's a beautiful, and Mark Mylod, the director, staged it really, really beautifully. A lot of those close-ups of their faces. Jacob does wonderful work, a very extreme close-up when she's, looking at him down there for the first time, and just the fear and the embarrassment and the shame of it, and then the look she gives him where she smiles and it's okay, I love you, and I think that's lovely. It's lovely work. It's a nice scene.